examples where free trade is something that is very, very good for the countries that are involved in it. And free trade surely is a good thing.
OK, thank you very much for now. Now, to the health service. It was able to cope, just about, of course, with COVID, but the pressures were intense, and all the effort that went into dealing with the pandemic meant other treatments were inevitably delayed. Now, that means tens of thousands of people in our region, many in serious pain, now face a much longer wait for their operations.
If by mistake it moves, it is so painful, I tell you. And you believe you me, I am quite used to pain.
Shobhas Shrivastava has waited more than a year for surgery on her shoulder. The 87-year-old suffers from severe arthritis. We first spoke to her back in February. 4 months later, her discomfort has got worse, but at last she has good news.
Finally, I now have a date, which is exactly a week today, 1st of July.
What were your feelings when you heard that the operation was going ahead?
Well, I must admit I was absolutely exhilarated.
The retired consultant anaesthetist and MBE has nothing but praise for NHS staff, but says the service to which she dedicated her life needs help.
We need more doctors, we need more nurses, we need more healthcare workers of all denominations.
And Shobhas's frustration is far from unique. The early stages of the pandemic saw procedures like this cataract operation cancelled. Now hospitals like Sunderland Eye Infirmary are playing catch-up.
Certainly last year at the initial lockdown, where essentially all non-urgent clinical activity stopped for 3 months, that created a lot of backlog of patients waiting to be seen, both for surgery and in the outpatient department. Throughout that time, we still managed to maintain some urgent work.
This facility has shorter waiting times than most, but the wider picture is less positive. The total number waiting for hospital treatment in our region is 237,000, up around 6,000 during the pandemic. And patients are waiting longer. More than 64,000 have waited longer than the official target of 18 weeks, double the pre-COVID figure. More than 14,000 have waited over a year for treatment. In early 2020, the figure was just 66. The Northumbria NHS Trust says its local figures are now getting better. Greater use of remote appointments, an example of increased efficiency.
We now see approximately 35% of our patients virtually. That's about 13,000 patients a month. A massive transformation.
But hospital staff expect demand to remain intense and potentially to grow as patients put off by the pandemic finally come forward for treatment.
Whilst they have picked up, we're still really below the referral numbers that we used to see coming from GPs for patients to access our services. So that does raise concerns as to how many patients are there waiting and just still don't feel perhaps safe enough to want to access the services.
The government has focused an extra £1 billion on cutting waiting lists and says routine operations are bouncing back. But with the repercussions of COVID-19 still being felt, NHS recovery remains a vision clouded by uncertainty.
Luke Walton reporting. Sharon Hodgson, it was inevitable, of course, because of the pandemic, really, the lists were going to go up, and when you obviously shut down operating theatres for such a long time. But there does seem a real focus there on the hospitals on tackling this. Do you accept that progress is now being made?
Well, I think this is a devastating verdict on 11 years of chronic underfunding and understaffing by the Conservative government. When we entered this pandemic, waiting lists were already sky high, cancer targets were already being missed. So this, we could have guessed it would get worse. It certainly wasn't going to get better. And, we've now got 300,000 cancer patients waiting to see a specialist. There are 37,000 cancer patients waiting to start their treatment. And, this is going to take serious investment, not just the billion that's been announced. The NHS was already underfunded. 100,000 vacancies were in the NHS at the start of the pandemic. We need a long-term boost, investment, okay, and a boost to get this kick-started as soon as possible.
You've heard what Sharon Hodgson's had to say, Garp. I mean, that's true, isn't it, that the waiting lists were already rising before the pandemic. This is chickens coming home to roost, with the added COVID factor.
Well, I think there's 2 points to be made. The first is the pandemic has clearly had an impact, as your report made clear, but that the NHS is very, very much open for business. And the most important part of this programme is to make it clear to viewers that if they have concerns, they genuinely should attend their local GP or their A&E if it's more serious. The second bit is looking at the figures. The NHS has never had more money than it has under the Coalition and then the Conservative government. The budget has consistently, and everybody can see the stats, gone up by a dramatic way over many, many years. There is way more budgeting going forward. There's over 33 billion going in extra to the NHS through to 2023, 2024. Yeah, and we've never had any... Hang on,
no, I understand that, but the problem is we can talk figures about money, but we can also talk figures about waiting lists. And the problem is, despite all that investment, and we can talk figures because there are some figures which suggest investment has not been as great as it was in the past in terms of the increase.
That is genuinely wrong, Richard.
No. In terms of the rate of increase... There are figures which suggest actually that it was greater in the 10 years before 2010.
Every single year it has gone up.
It's gone up, but not as much as it had in the past. Yeah. But we're not going to agree on that. But let's talk waiting lists. Why doesn't the government
take you to task on that? That is simply not the case.
We're not going to agree on that. Why does the government not be... Right, OK, well, we can have an argument about that. We're not going to agree. Why does the government not be honest, though, about the fact that it's going to need more money to try and tackle these? I mean, there was a leaked report that came out suggesting up to £10 billion a year will be needed to clear this backlog. And that's true, isn't it? There's going to have to be extra money again.
So, again, you make 2 points. The first is the backlog is being addressed. You spoke to Northumbria NHS Trust. I spoke to them today. They've had a dramatic improvement even since March of this year of their backlog. The second is in terms of the budget. As I've indicated to you, £33 billion plus increase up to 2023-2024. And just answering the point on nurses and doctors, we're up to 124,000 doctors, 304,000 nurses. These are increasing on year. So with great respect, the money is being applied to the NHS.
Sharon Hodgson, would you accept that there are record levels of investment in the NHS? I certainly wouldn't dispute that.
But it's so late in the day. If we hadn't started from such a poor position, we wouldn't be where we are now. And the amount
record amounts of investment. I don't think that Labour was proposing much more investment in the last general election than the Tories were they?
In government, the Labour Party has always properly funded the NHS. You can never point to a period in history when the Labour Party is not in government has not properly funded the NHS. The NHS would have been in a much better position now if it had been in Labour hands.
Yes. Garpham, in terms of staff, wouldn't it have helped staff retention to have given the nurses a proper pay increase rather than the amount that's been offered, which effectively, with inflation, is a cut?
Well, you'll be aware that the NHS has received a pay increase, and that was a decision made by the Prime Minister and by the Cabinet to increase NHS pay. Of course,
but less than inflation.
Of course, we would like to increase all pay, but the decision was made to make the NHS a special case, as you know.
Sharon Hodgson, would you accept that?
No, they're getting a real-term pay cut, as Guy knows. They were promised a 2.1% pay rise as part of a 3-year deal. That has been reneged upon. 1% pay rise is a real terms pay cut. We've just got to be truthful about that.
OK, all right. Thanks very much. Now, it's not every day that one of the North East's most iconic landmarks gets its own debate in Parliament. That's exactly what happened this week. But then